bring back our front bench to talk about that. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, and Tom Mulcair. Tom, I'll start with you. Should Don Davies be as confident as he is in there being no floor crossers? And does he have the opening that he says he does?
There's always a chance that somebody could listen to that sort of siren call, although I think that he's right to be fairly confident with the group that he's got there. We saw in the spring, Vashi, soon after the election, that there was quite a bit of a tussle over the rules for the leadership. You might recall that the three women in the caucus who were quite concerned about this shared one thing. They were all racialized women, and they said that they weren't even consulted properly by the party. So that's the type of thing that the NDP, with only 7 members, just can't allow to happen anymore. So I think that Don is going in with his head held high, because he's not wrong when he says, look, the Liberals have had a branding that's made it tough, and they even had a deal with the NDP that was a self-inflicted wound by the NDP, because it was hard for them to convince people that there was any reason not to vote Liberal. But what he's saying is, I think, essentially true, that the type of discussion we just had before on a single subject, which was climate change. But look at what's happening on other areas. Mr. Carney is saying, for example, that he wants to get tougher on crime and roll back some of the bail rules that were written by his closest advisor, David Lametti, who was then the Justice Minister. He's looking at, when the Air Canada strike happened, it was an immediate reflex to be in favor of the employer's position. So there are any number of things that are you can list right now that show that this iteration of the Liberal Party is definitely much more likely to lean right than to lean left.
What, I guess, challenges or opportunities does that pose for both the Conservatives and the NDP, Lisa? Because I think it is fair to say, at this juncture at least, it does seem like a pivot to right of where the previous level government was.
Yeah. You know, the old adage is that the Liberals get all of their progressive ideas from the NDP think tank, and they get all their economic ideas from the Conservative think tank, and they kind of, sorry about that, Brian, but they kind of go down the middle.
Brian will defend the position in a moment.
Brian will defend it. So the reality is that in the shifting of the spectrum, Tom is exactly correct, as is Don. You can see the fact there's going to be a lot more space on the more progressive side of the agenda, and that's where the NDP should inhabit. And indeed, I mean, what I'm looking for in the race, if I could say, is I want to see a strong labor voice come out, somebody who speaks for the auto workers, for example, the steel workers out there, because they can make a case that the other parties may not be necessarily listening to them, and they may not have done a great job with the economy that needed to happen in order for that sector to do much better.
What about for the Conservatives? Because if, in fact, a lot of even the things, the way in which this government is talking about energy, for example, is the way that Pierre Poilievre hammered Justin Trudeau for not talking about it. So, like, if in fact this government is putting forward a lot of policies that the Conservatives supported, like, how do you delineate yourself, and do you have to be careful about how you do?
To a point. So the Liberals are approaching the edge of getting to the point where the Conservatives would cross, which is build a pipeline, do move oil and gas. They're not there yet. We're hearing lots of offices and programs and ideas and concepts and ideology, but we're not seeing the actual building of it. And that's the world that the Conservatives will inhibit. It'll be, let's just make sure we see it happening. You say you're going to do it. Let's make sure that you do it. And that's the tricky part.
I'll put the same question to you, Brian. Like, what challenges do you think the Conservatives will have in navigating a different Liberal Party in power? And what challenges or opportunities might the NDP have?
Well, let me start by saying I do think Liberals have lots of good ideas, but even more importantly, they're able to recognize a good idea no matter where it comes from.
Oh my God, what a great
right?
best spin ever, yeah.
I like that. Thank you very much. So I would, to your question, say that I agree with Lisa on her point that the Conservatives can talk kind of about implementation, management, but also I think that they have, at least from the previous campaign and probably the 2 years before that, also set the stage to have the brand, to have the ownership of the issue of cost of living. And as David Coletto just said, that's still the major issue, and it seems like it might even be on the rise. So that could be where maybe the Conservatives find themselves yet again trying to go with to try to differentiate themselves from the Liberals. And I'm not sure that really is Carney's brand. I'm not even sure that really is necessarily the thing he's the most focused on right now. I'm sure that they would say it's because we have to be seized, again, use that word, with the trade conflict, but nevertheless, there might be an opening there. On the NDP, I just want to kind of flip what Tom said. I think he made a great point. I would just sort of add that I don't think this is necessarily by design, but Carney and co, I think, are able to go a little bit more to the center because they're not really, politically speaking, really concerned with the NDP taking up too much of that space right now, given operationally they find themselves with 7 people in a caucus that doesn't even have official status.
Right, valid point. Tom, your thoughts on, you've weighed in on the NDP, but on the Conservatives as well. And I take what Brian and Lisa say certainly about focusing on, and we saw that in that open letter, right? Crime, immigration, cost of living, and I do think that there are sort of vacuums to fill a little bit in particularly crime and maybe even immigration. But at the same time, I'm very curious to see if the way in which that message is conveyed up against Carney is any different than it was up against Trudeau.
Yeah, I do think it's different. And I also think that the very hard edge of Pierre Poilievre is one of the reasons that they came up short during the election campaign. Canadians got to have a good, hard look at him. They'll talk, the Conservatives will say it was the perfect storm, it was the threat from Trump, it was the arrival of Carney, the departure of Trudeau. All that's true. But there's an element that does involve the person and the person delivering the messages, because, as Brian said with a smile, the Liberals aren't shy about borrowing good ideas from other parties, whether it's the NDP on the left or the Conservatives on the right. With regard to that hard edge, we're noticing it, for example, when he talked about temporary foreign workers. It was pretty well the strongest words that I've ever heard from a party leader in Canada, almost bordering on anti-immigration. I mean, it was a harder edge than you're used to. Now, there's a reason for that as well, because Mr. Poilievre is up against a leadership vote in January. He's got to keep his base happy, and he's got to play that game. But the more he plays hardball, the more he plays that hard edge, the more he's going to push back a lot of average voting Canadians and say, guy's got some good ideas, but there's an edginess to him that I'm just not comfortable with. And so that's the balancing act that the Conservatives are going to have to do. I do think that they've done a masterful job of staying in the news. Poilievre knows that game well. He's very good at social media. He's very good at getting things that are gadgety, getting the letter out there. Everything's a crisis. And again, that's the type of exaggeration that people grow tired of. But I do think that in terms of political communication, the masterclass in Canadian politics continues to be the Conservative Party.
Lisa, what are your thoughts on how, I guess, how, if any, behavioral modification has to happen, essentially, in this Parliament versus, let's say, the one with Trudeau?
So I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to jumping off what something Tom said. For me, I think the biggest danger is the fact that Prime Minister Carney has really set some expectations out there. I'm going to have a deal by July 1st, then I'm going to do something by August 1. He's not afraid to tell Canadians that he's actually going to do something, not knowing whether or not he can actually do it, because the politics can be really awkward and difficult. The Conservatives don't make that mistake, so they're not going to be making big promises, but they will be there to blame and show where the Prime Minister has said, well, he told you he was going to do this, and he hasn't been able to do it yet. And that, I think, is an open spot for the Conservatives to attack the Liberals without a question.
Does it matter how they attack, though? Like, does there have to be a difference in that? Because I think you don't think that that Poilievre has to change his style at all?
No, I don't think so at all. But I think Mark Carney has to be ready for Parliament. It's a different world than being in a boardroom, a lot less civil.
Brian, what do you think about that?
My humble opinion would be that I think Poilievre was a very effective leader of the opposition. Obviously, Tom Mulcair would be one of the more effective leader of the oppositions we've seen. Poilievre was very different styles, of course, and Poilievre was very effective. I'm not 100% sure, though, that he really took the airtime that he had, given Trudeau at the time was having such a rough go, to let people know who he was and what he was about and what his priorities were and what kind of values he would focus on. The list goes on. I think it was all about Trudeau. It was all about the government, and he did that very well. But when you're the leader of the opposition and you are going to be the leader of your party in the campaign, there's a balancing act. I would suggest that he would most likely have to start to do a bit better on that balancing act. He started to do it near the halfway point of the campaign. I listened to a podcast, it was a kind of a random one that I landed on, and I thought he was really good. He was just telling, I didn't necessarily agree with everything, but he was telling these stories and background on why these policies were important to him, and he just came across, to use Tom's word, not as edgy as he may have been the sort of year before. So more of that would be my humble suggestion to them if they were looking to try to have that balancing act be a little bit better.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Thanks, everyone. Great to have you here. Tom, great to have you back. Tom Mulcair, Brian Gallant, and Lisa Raitt, our front bench.